It's so great to look out and see so many people here today, so I really appreciate your support and everyone being out here. And I am not, the most intelligent person in environmental, issues. That's why I invited so many great people here on the panels today, so they could give you, their knowledge. So again, I'm really looking forward to this. We have a great panel discussions here today. Hopefully, we're going to come out with some great takeaways. But my role to start, beyond just welcoming everyone here today, is to talk about DEP's soon-to-be proposed land use rules, the PAC real rules. So actually, let me just, they're about to be proposed soon. Here they are. I will admit I have not gone through this in great detail yet. I'm working my way through it. I keep falling asleep. I'm going to have to figure out how to do that, but coming in July. So let me talk a little bit about what these rules are and what they do. Again, just from a process perspective, they are now available in a courtesy copy. It's on DEP's webpage. I encourage all of you to pull it down, print it out. We still have a few trees left we need to take care of. They're going to be officially proposed in July. We're not sure which register it's going to be, but they're coming out in July. They're giving us a 90-day comment period. They knew we were going to ask for more time, so they gave it to us up front. That's a good thing. Plus having it now, so we have at least like 5 months to really get into it, but before the comment period is going to close. And there will be 3 public hearings on this. Again, this is a complicated rule. So my role for the next 20 minutes or thereabout is just to go over certain parts of this rule. I'm not going to be able to go into any of it in great detail, but I want to at least give you all a flavor for what these rules do, or what the proposals will do. So there are really 4 themes I really want to address, on these rules. One, they're going to deal with sea level rise. So these are forward projecting rules. They're going to assume a 5-foot sea level rise. And I'll get into a little bit more detail in the future. And that 5-foot sea level rise projected to the year 2100 being applied now is going to have significant impacts, on everyone. That's 1. 2, they're changing how they do stormwater in redevelopment areas. And by doing so, they're going to have a tremendous impact on the redevelopment potential of properties all across the state. Third, they're making a number of administrative changes on how you submit permits and basically getting rid of almost all permit by rules. And again, we'll talk about that, in a short bit as well. And then for everything else, in that stack of documents I just showed you, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of little changes, and those little changes sometimes are going to have major impacts, but all of them are going to have some impacts in how you do business. And this is not just development. If you have a business, a facility that you're operating, it's going to impact the things you can or cannot do. Because for those of you who have been in DEP, and I see almost everyone here has been, and if you've been involved in the land use program in particular, there's almost not a thing you could do, not a shovel you could put into the ground without impacting some DEP regulation on land use, be it flood hazard, be it coastal, be it wetlands, waterfront development, et cetera. So it's going to have tremendous impacts going forward. So actually, I got to make sure I time myself so I don't go too far. Although I believe someone's going to be holding signs up. Where's our sign person, telling me when I'm overdue? It's back there. So 5-foot sea level rise. Let me just start off by talking about why 5 foot. Because this has been an issue I've been working on for over 4 years now. When DEP first said that they were going to use 5 foot, and that's based on a report that came out of Rutgers in 2019. This was done before they had any inclination that they were going to use that for regulatory purposes. They contracted with Rutgers to do a report. So we would kind of have some idea moving forward from a planning perspective, from a what could happen perspective. And Rutgers came out with a report, and it, has a whole bunch of different scenarios. If you haven't seen the staff report and you care to read about sea level rise and climate science, I commend it to you. But they basically said by the year 2100, using what they call a moderate emission scenario, it really isn't, but that's a different story. We think, with a certain level of probability that there will be a 5.1 foot sea level rise by that point in time. The problem with that is the science has evolved. That 2019 report was based on certain projections, certain assumptions, certain expert judgments, but not a lot of hard science behind it. In the last 5 years, there has been a lot more science that has come out. Again, without getting too far into nuances of sea level rise and the science behind it, let me just break down quickly how they got to the 5 foot and why it's really not going to happen, at least not according to most mainstream scientists, even the author of the 2019 report. So New Jersey, by the way, is sinking. We've been sinking since the last ice age. We sink about 12 inches every century. We'll continue to sink 12 inches every century for the foreseeable future. So that 1 foot of relative sea level rise is already baked in. It's going to happen. Nothing we could do about it. We also have another couple inches because we have groundwater withdrawals along our coast. We could talk to I'm not sure if anyone here is from water supply, but we could talk about that later. And that adds another, couple inches, into the mix every century based on subsidence, based on the groundwater withdrawals. The rest of it all is based on climate change impacts. As the world warms, as it is, water expands, and that expansion is projected to be about another foot or so. It could be up to 2 feet. It could be 1 to 2 feet over the next century because the oceans are warming and the water does expand. So we're really looking at between 2 and 3 feet over the next century based on basic climate science. It may only be 1 foot, but we think it's going to be 2. It could be as much as 3. The 5 foot comes from certain assumptions that there's going to be a tremendous ice sheet collapse in the West Antarctic, which is going to, flood our oceans and create another 2 foot of sea level rise. The problem is, no one now thinks that's a likely scenario. DEP now knows because they've gone back after we kept pushing and pushing and pushing, hired their own climatologists, et cetera. They recognize that the science thinks this is unlikely scenario, but yet DEP is moving forward with it anyway. Something we'll deal with later on, something I'll talk to my attorneys about if they move forward with this. But really, climate science is showing it's 2 foot, maybe 3. DEP is going with 5. No one else, by the way, in the entire nation is doing this. Not NOAA, not the Army Corps of Engineers, not FEMA, not any other state, DEP, not any other nation, by the way. DEP is going out on their own and saying 5 foot. So again, what does that mean as a practical matter? So when DEP regulates along the coast from a flooding perspective, you have your normal high tides, but we always know there's a flood level that happens. We all know it from Sandy. Sandy was a projected flood level. That's what could happen when storms come in and tides come in. You could have a Sandy type of flood. So what you have is the FEMA flood elevation at a certain level, and that, FEMA flood elevation is not changing. DEP now is going to add 5 foot on top of that. You take that 5 foot, you project it inland, and that now becomes a new flood area. DEP is calling that the inundation zone. So wherever that water they think is going to touch, they're making an assumption that in 75 years from now, that land will be underwater. And they're going to regulate you today based on that assumption and make you comply with all the requirements, that are already part of the flood hazard rules. I mean, you're going to have to elevate your buildings up, higher. Again, this is all prospective. It's new development, reconstruction, additions, et cetera. Although some of that could be fairly small. So they have their inundation zone, and then on top of that, there's also a flood hazard area beyond that, so it goes further in. The new elevation they're calling the climate-adjusted flood elevation. So again, it's 5 foot above FEMA. Again, it means buildings go higher. It means that downtowns are going to be difficult. DEP will tell you that they're not going to tell people no, they can't build. They're not going to. They're saying this is not a no-build rule, but once you start putting these requirements on developments, on reconstruction, et cetera, it's going to make it that much more difficult to build, that much more difficult to do improvements on your property. And by the way, we're talking about roads too. We're talking about infrastructure as well. DEP will tell you that they're building in flexibility into the rules, but all of you DEP people know that flexibility means more requirements, more reports, more studies, less certainty, more cost, more time. So there's an awful lot that's going to happen as a result of this 5 foot elevation. There's also, by the way, going to be deed notices that you're going to have to put on your properties if you get a DEP permit, even as simple as a general permit to do something simple. You're going to have to put a deed notice on your property telling future owners that this property is going to be flooded. Again, it may never flood. It may be totally dry right now. But again, on the 75-year out projection of 5 foot, you're now going to have to put a deed notice on your property. And for public properties, there's also going to have to be signage, 2-inch letters, the whole big thing, how DEP regulates these things on your property, telling everybody exactly how much they think it's going to flood in 75 years from now. So that is all going to be a big deal moving forward. Again, I'm just summarizing this, but there's a lot more to it, as we move forward. The second part, stormwater. For years, DEP has recognized that you don't want to apply new construction stormwater requirements to redevelopment, because when you do so, you're going to take up more land because your basins or engineering requirements, because we're always trying to encourage redevelopment in our urban areas especially. So DEP, and I've been part of a lot of these meetings, has always decided we're not going to do this because we want to encourage redevelopment. It's already hard enough, to redevelop in certain of our areas, or urban areas. So we're going to hold them to a different standards. Go back, you could put back what you had there right now without additional requirements. DEP is now changing that. Their rationale is especially from an EJ perspective, they want to get more water improvements, in areas. So you're now going to have to meet new development standards for stormwater, which means that your building that you may have, it may be taking up entire lot that you have. You won't be able to build back to where you had before. You're now going to have to save room for whatever the stormwater requirements are on your site. And there's a concern that this can make redevelopment in our urban areas more difficult, if nothing else, more costly. And as you all know, this is not a no, you can't do it. But when you have marginal projects, and this is something I don't think DEP ever quite understood, is that economics govern everything. It doesn't really matter that it's a little bit more costly, it's a little bit more time consuming, it's a little bit more uncertain. You start adding cost, uncertainty, and time onto a project, and then when you're putting your money up, you might just say, and as you all know, no, I'm going to go on to the next project where I know what the costs are, I know what the time is, I know how to project this out. So again, this is going to make some projects a little bit less likely. Third part, and we're going to have a panel at the end of the day, former DEP people talking about process improvements, how to make a regulatory program better. One of the things DEP has done over time, especially in the land use program, has been to say, you know what, we need to focus on the big stuff. We need to focus on what's really having an impact on the environment, and let's put our efforts there. If it's a small project, an addition to a house, behind a bulkhead, a bulkhead itself of certain sizes, we're just going to tell you, do it. It's called a permit by rule. It means if you act within these specific parameters, you don't need to come to DEP at all. You're just do it and you're done, because we don't have time to go out in everyone's backyard, to single-family homeowners, to smaller impacts. We trust you. We do have the ability to go out, but we basically trust you to go do it right, and we'll save our resources for where it really matters. DEP is now taking a different position. They're saying, we want to know what you're doing. We're not going to tell you no. You can still go ahead and do it, but we want you to register what you're doing, because we want to create a database of all these small projects, because we're going to be able to maybe go out and enforce it. If we don't know you did it, we won't be able to enforce it. And from a watershed perspective, we want to accumulate all this data so we could look at the watershed and make whatever decisions. I will tell you, and this is my personal opinion or personal experience, DEP doesn't have the staff, the time to go out to these sites. They don't have the capability to take all this data. They already have files and files and files and files of things, of major things they can't look at. They're not going to be able to go out and do anything with all this data. But again, it's a different mindset at the department right now. And what this is going to mean is that you're going to have to, and it's not a big deal, you're going to have to come in and go into the system, say, here's what I'm doing. You're going to have time limits now, and how I think it's usually like a 6-month period they're going to give you to get your project done. And they're going to make you go back into that database and say, we are now complete. No big deal from a process perspective, but when you're dealing with small individual homeowners, when you're dealing with small projects, when you're dealing with marinas or whomever else, and you're now dealing with thousands and thousands of these small things, you're opening yourself up to potential liability, and the department now is going to presumably have more obligations to go out and in people's backyards. I will tell you, when I was at DEP and I ran the land use program and the enforcement program, one of the worst things we had to do that I hated doing is going into people's backyards and saying, no, you built your fence too close to the wetland. No, you put that shed 10 foot beyond where you are. So again, that's why you have permits by rule, to try and get DEP out of the small things. Now DEP is, again, going back and doing that. Other provisions. Again, I just showed you that stack of documents. There's an awful lot in there. They're changing rules all across the board. Again, I haven't gone through that, in detail to understand what it is. But now that you're changing the flood elevations, that in itself is going to make all other permits subject to those new requirements in the flood hazard area. But they're doing a whole bunch of other things as well. Again, there will be hundreds of different changes. We're all going to have to understand what these are. Let me just mention a few of the more significant ones that I just pulled out. For those of you who are familiar with the Freshwater Wetlands Act, if you're going to disturb over an acre of land, you need to come in for individual permit, and you basically have to show why your development has to disturb that acre of wetlands. It's an alternatives analysis. Why can't I do it somewhere else? But if you're going to do less than an acre of disturbance through various different, no Q&A, not for me. Thank you. If you're going to do less than an acre, you could do it through a general permit, and it's pretty much pro forma. Here's what I'm going to do. It's only going to be a quarter acre of disturbance to run this line through or whatever, and you're done. It was a simple process, and they encourage people to minimize the impacts to wetlands so they could get their general permit. DEP is now going to just have you justify why you need that general permit. And again, this is a whole new concept. I'm not sure if the act actually allows that, but it's going to get DEP now involved in a lot more types of minimal projects that they were never involved in before. Again, I'm hearing from a lot of folks, you can't get your permits approved right now, and now we're going to have DEP with no additional staff doing an awful lot more work. Directional drilling, DEP has issued, allowed you to do this in the past without any real approvals. If you're going to drill under a wetland, under a water body, go ahead and do it. DEP is now making you come in and get permits for that, and that's going to make certain projects, especially pipelines, much more iffy and uncertain. They're going to apply riparian zones on barrier islands, meaning there's going to be a 150-foot or 300-foot buffer on barrier islands, and that's going to limit what you could do there. Again, we all know our barrier islands, they're all built up, but now DEP is imposing additional requirements of what you can or cannot do there. And one of the others that, back around 2000, or thereabouts, DEP married the coastal rules up to the state plan. And part of that was to try to get towns to come in and get their plan approvals. But a lot of towns weren't coming in, so what DEP did was created centers on the barrier islands because they're already developed, and by creating centers, you get a certain amount of impervious cover and development potential. DEP is now saying, we're no longer going to recognize those coastal centers anymore on the barrier islands. We're going to make you come in and get state plan approval. As a practical matter, for those of you who have been involved in the state plan for years, towns may not do that. When you don't do that, you're going to go from a 90% impervious cover allowance down to 3% impervious cover allowance. There are going to be an awful lot of people who are going to be surprised that they can't put that addition onto the house when they thought they could have before. So, 929. So, there's an awful lot in these rules. I commend you all to read them. We have a task force that, that I've convened working on these rules. If any of you want to be involved in that group, we meet, we discuss, we share information. Just email me and we'll get you on the list. But otherwise, DEP rules, make sure you're aware of them. We're going to be spending the next year working on these rules, either in our comments or otherwise. And if they adopt them as is, I'll be talking to a number of the attorneys out here, and we'll figure out what our next steps are. So I thank you very much, and I want to welcome up, our next panel, our first panel. So we need 5 minutes because Dave's not here yet. And I timed this out perfectly, too. Yeah, the best laid plans. So I will take any questions if anybody has any questions, on the rules, except from Raina, because she's going to ask me a hard one.
Okay, Ray. I haven't had the opportunity to read the almost 1,100 pages of the land use rules that you just went over. Just a quick question. For redevelopment, you're saying now that the department is going to require stormwater for the new regulations for stormwater, not like anything redevelopment. Have they considered anything in their economic analysis about what it's going to do to the redevelopment for affordable housing, that all the towns are required to build affordable housing? Because that's where all the redevelopment's happening, converting these older facilities into apartments, and underneath is retail. So it's going to be an interesting confliction, because we have to build all this housing in the state. Do they mention any of this in the economic analysis?
I haven't gotten entirely through the economic aspects yet, but when you start reading them, and for those of you who know DEP rules, they start off by saying these rules will have a positive economic, outcome. The economic analysis for a number of us, and I know I've had conversations with several of you on this topic, has not been robust for quite some time. They make certain assumptions. Hey, we're going to be protecting you from being flooded out. Isn't that a great thing? So no matter what the burdens are on the other side, no matter what the redevelopment potential we're losing, this is going to be a good thing long-term, economically, because you're still going to be alive and your building will still exist. But you're absolutely right, and it's for that economic impact purpose that we have, that DEP has never gone this route before, but now from an EJ perspective, I think, Katie said last week on a conference call, people who are living in EJ communities deserve clean water as well. We can have a discussion as to whether or not these rules will actually have any impact at all on the quality of the Passaic, the Hudson, the Delaware, or whatever, but this is the direction they're going.
Great summary, Ray. I know that's like a beast of a document, only on page 200, so I feel you on that. I just wanted to
Only 900 pages to go.
I know, right? But I will say that DEP had maybe 10 hours worth of seminars over the last, webinars over the last 2.5 weeks that were pretty informative that we attended. And I think my biggest takeaway is that, they've been talking about this 5-foot sea level rise for the last 2 years. The rule proposal that came out, really no change to what we've been hearing for the last 2 years, but just to your point, there's been definitely additions kind of squeaked in there for these other regulations, the freshwater wetland rules, the storm management rules, the flood hazard rules, where it's definitely going to be significantly impactful to our clients from an economic standpoint, right? One of the things we focused in on was the cumulative impacts are now going to require mitigation. So for wetland general permits that allowed, up to 1/4 of an acre, and even over 1/10 of an acre would have required mitigation, you're now adding all the different general permits, so you can get to a 1/10 of an acre, it's going to trigger mitigation. Same thing for riparian impact. So again, just, we're still diving through it, but it's definitely going to be impactful from an economic standpoint. And to answer your question, affordable housing was definitely not addressed. And as far as that, no, definitely not.
And actually, I was talking to someone the other day from the housing community, and this is more general, this even gets beyond DEP, about how, we have policies on one side trying to build more affordable housing throughout the state, but then it seems like some people don't get that message, because we keep putting roadblocks, in the way. And while all of these things might be good, individually, it's hard to argue abstractly against wetland mitigation, but once you start adding everything into these mixes, it's a cumulative impact.